Hello, and welcome to Primary Focus, the Kapow Primary podcast, where we talk about the conversations that matter in primary education today. Today, I am joined by Neil Mercer, author of Oracy, which has come out this year, I think, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And Marie Thornby, who is our pedagogy lead at Kapow Primary as well. Neil, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Neil Mercer, and I'm the director of Oracy Cambridge, which is a centre concerned with making the link between research and practice in education when it comes to spoken language.
And Marie?
Hi, I'm Marie Thornby. I'm pedagogy lead at Kapow Primary, and I'm responsible for making sure that our offer is grounded in really excellent teaching and learning. And my interest in Oracy is really about driving forward equitable provision in the classroom.
Thank you. And I'm Caroline. I'm the head of curriculum design here at Kapow. So I'm really interested in how we can develop these kind of cross-cutting skills that are so important for children, but that maybe don't have their own time in the timetable. So things like Oracy, how can we design our curriculums for other subjects to make sure we're developing those skills as well. So today's podcast, we're going to be specifically talking about how can schools help children find their voice, which I think that question shows actually how important oracy is, isn't
Mm,
it? And it's not
mm.
it's not just about teaching them something, but it's about helping them find a voice in the world. And we're going to be focusing on kind of three areas. What is oracy and why are we talking about it now? Oracy curriculum and assessment, like what
Mm,
what are the issues
mm.
there, and then some more practical strategies for how schools can build oracy into what they're doing every day. So I think it makes sense to start. And Neil, hopefully you can give us a good definition here of what actually is oracy. And I think one of the questions I always have with it is how is it different to the sort of speaking and listening that used to be in the curriculum?
Yeah, well, the word oracy was in fact invented by a guy called Andy Wilkinson back in the 60s because he thought speaking and listening sounded a bit trivial.
Mm.
And he wanted something that sounded more like literacy and numeracy. And it does, doesn't it?
Yeah, just to
Uh,
fancy it up,
yeah,
basically.
but basically what it means is the ability to use the skills of speaking and listening in all situations to get things done. Just as literacy is the ability to use the skills of reading and writing.
Mhm.
So it's just that really.
Yeah, and I know that in your book you talk a bit about it having kind of three aspects to
That's right.
oracy. Um,
Yeah,
you're
it's
going to
got
test.
three aspects. It helps to think of that, I think. One is the most obvious one is you can call it learning how to talk. It's how can people develop the skills they need to be able to communicate well in spoken language. And that's something that I don't think really still happens enough in schools.
Mm.
The second one is learning through talk, which is what happens in classrooms all the time. It's the main way people learn while they're in the classroom. Talk's the main tool of a teacher's trade.
Mm.
And so learning through talk is one of the other aspects. How can we maximize that? Relates to what you said your interests are. And the third one is learning about talk, which we realised is pretty important. It's that it's not a case of a choice between knowledge and skills, as some people have tried to say. You need both. And just as people need to understand in literacy how texts work and how reading and writing works, they need to understand how spoken language works.
Mm.
What's its structure? Why is it used in the way it's used in different kinds of situations? And there's not really been enough on that yet. So those are the three aspects: learning how to talk, learning through talk, and learning about talk.
Yeah.
And I think that's critical as well because I don't know about you, Caroline, but I have facilitated a lot of really poor debates in my primary classroom. And sometimes those debates have gone wrong because the children don't have sufficient subject knowledge, or perhaps it's a
Mm.
poorly designed question. But I think most often, or more often than not, it's because the children don't have those solid talk tools and maybe ideas about the ground rules for how to talk. So we haven't built those up sufficiently over the primary phase in order to enable our children to
We're just
communicate.
expecting them to be able to do
Yeah,
it
Yeah.
and giving the
exactly.
opportunity, but not teaching
And
how to do it.
understanding those conventions of what it means to talk for particular contexts or particular purposes.
Yeah.
Um, and I think very much it goes back to your point, Neil, about there's a difference between presenting, an oracy for presentation, an oracy for exploratory talk,
Mm,
which is so important in our foundation subjects, especially for, DT and
mm.
science and all sorts of things, really.
I wonder whether we've gone a little bit backwards in terms of doing that in schools. Just because the last couple of weeks I've been looking around secondary schools with one
Yeah.
of my children, and every school that we've gone round is almost silent when the children are learning. And one of the head teachers actually said to us, "Oh, we're introducing tea time and it's talk time, and we've set the tables up in groups so that they can talk to each other. And it's this new initiative."
Yeah, I think it's gone backwards in some ways because I don't think people have taken full account of the evidence that's now available about why it's important to get
Mm.
students talking in a constructive and productive way. And there's been a bit, there's always on the one side this sort of backlash from the people who claim they're supporting traditional education, who say that learning only happens when teachers speak and students sit in rows and just listen.
Yeah.
But it's not the case. I mean, I've got a nice quote in the book from Edward Noakes, who's the director of curriculum at Eton. And he said, "We don't allow boys in lessons not to speak.
Mm.
And what's more, we spend a whole term with new teachers teaching them how to lead discussions in
Yeah.
their classrooms. So it's not the case that people who are paying that much for an education are getting these silent schools.
Mm.
And I think it's awful. I mean, one of my granddaughters has been in a secondary school in the southwest, and they're not even allowed to talk in lessons about the subject that they're studying.
Mm.
Or if they do, they get sent off to this white empty room, which is called the reflection room,
Mm.
Mm.
and they have to sit there. It's awful,
Yeah.
and there's no evidence to say that's a good way to improve results. I think it's because in the private sector, it's always been considered. It might not have called it oracy, but it's always been considered that was one of the aspects of a person's skills set they were developing.
Mm.
And I think there's a historical thing in the state sector. Oh no, you should just be concentrating on writing and maths. That's all that matters.
Yeah. And I think that's so important, that learning through talk, because
Mm,
actually I often don't know what I think about something. I'm not able to form an idea. I'm not able to develop that idea if I'm not able to talk to other people and have to articulate what I think. And
And have that opportunity to refine it or have someone challenge it
that's right.
and make it better for that kind
mm,
of exploratory discussion with somebody else,
yeah,
because you're almost having to justify and defend and I guess co-construct that thinking
That's
and that
right.
understanding.
yeah,
Yes, and I think the other thing for teachers is if you never really hear what your students think and what they thought about what you've taught them by having whole class discussions and things, you won't know whether they've learned it or not. And you might, gleefully move on to the next topic
Mm.
when half of them still don't understand it.
And I think it helps children understand that learning is a process. You don't have to
Mm.
know or not know something, that learning is a process of gaining understanding and clarifying your ideas and thoughts. Um, yeah,
yeah.
I
It's
think
not just
kind of,
passing information from one
yeah,
person to another, is
no,
it?
not at all.
Um, so we've kind of touched on the learning through talk there, and it's
Mm.
actually important for them to learn. Um, why else do we think it's really important in a primary school classroom to develop oracy?
Well, one reason is that we want students to become good communicators, don't we? So this is going to be part of the education for life. And we also know um, that students, that young children especially, have such a variation in the kind of talk experience they have outside school that we can't assume they've all had the same.
Mm.
We're all, as human beings, we're all designed to learn how to use spoken language, but it's not hardwired. We
Mm,
only learn it as there's a Russian literary theorist called Bakhtin, and he said this nice thing, which was children don't learn words from dictionaries, they take them from other people's mouths. And it's true. And I think that the pandemic has shown, there's been some research shown that when they've looked at what happened to children during the lockdown periods, for some children, it was great because their parents were at home a lot more. both mother and father, whoever, could read to them and do things with them. And they actually come back to school after the lockdown. The teacher say, wow, really, come on. There's other children, it seems like they may have been stuck in front of a screen all on their own for 18 months. And the teacher is saying one lot of 5-year-olds are like 7-year-olds with spoken language, the other lot are like 3-year-olds. So I think we've got to assume that most children need a rich talk experience in school if they're going to develop the language skills that they'll need.
It's
We
now
can't
about
assume.
closing that disadvantage gap.
Yeah, yeah. It's about making sure everybody gets the same.
Yeah.
Evens up.
Yeah.
And if you think about how much time we as adults, or the majority of adults, we spend most of our day speaking and listening, don't
Yeah.
we? And so it makes complete sense to make sure that that's structured into education.
Yeah, there's one bit actually that was in the book, so
Oh yeah.
I will credit you with it.
Good.
Where you talk about critical listening, I think,
Mm.
saying about how talk is used to persuade us, is used to control us, it's used to deliberately mislead us.
It is, and I think especially for secondary school students, there's a strong view. No, I know from meetings I've been to, um, that the English language GCSE just doesn't include enough about spoken language. It's in that kind of setting that students should be analysing the speeches made by Trump and other people and Keir Starmer or whoever, and looking back in his and saying how do they achieve the effects they do, and looking very hard at and critically at speeches being made and saying how justified are they in claiming this about immigrants or about the NHS
Yeah,
or
in the
whatever.
same way they look at poetry and
Exactly.
analyze
See, they
it,
do
it would
lots
make
and
sense,
lots
wouldn't it?
on written text,
Yeah.
but ironically, given how, as you say, we're using it all the time,
Yeah.
even people who don't read books speak and listen, we should really be learning to have a critical insights, gaining critical insights into spoken language in its use. I think you're quite right. I think a lot of people agree with you.
So as head of curriculum design, one of my kind of interests then is how can we make Oracy learning really progressive and purposeful, so that it's not just bunging in here's an opportunity for some speaking and listening in this lesson, but we're really thinking about how it builds over time.
I think one of the ways that can be done is by using the Oracy Skills Framework, which is the thing we created with Voice 21,
Yeah.
because that sets out all the different skills involved in using spoken language in every situation. And none of them are used in every situation, and some are more important in some situations than others. So, for example, in this situation, eye contact's probably quite important to show but if we're on the phone, it's irrelevant, isn't it? So I think with that one, what teachers can do is they can use that to make some judgment of how the students in their class vary even. There might be some people who are really good at projecting their voice and stating their opinion, but they never listen to anybody. Somebody else who's very good at listening and cooperating with people, but ask them to stand up and explain what they've just learned, and they're nervous or they're just not very skilled at doing it. So I think that way you can start to see how people vary, and just as you would with literacy and numeracy, you would see that they need help in different kinds of ways.
And when would you develop those skills? Because at the moment, English is very much focused on reading and writing,
Yeah, it
isn't it?
is.
So I think lots of teachers are doing a great job at the
Yeah,
moment of
yeah,
getting Oracy opportunities in all across the
yes,
curriculum. Um, but what I wonder is where do they actually teach some of these
that's
skills
right.
rather than just provide opportunities to
Mm.
practice them?
Yes, I think it's vital that Oracy isn't just putting Oracy into the curriculum or into schools doesn't just mean we'll have more focused group work in maths, which is great, or that we get students to explain their ideas more clearly in science and so on, or even to, try and get them involved in debates and so on. It means expressly teaching them how, just as you teach them how to spell, you teach them how to present, or you teach them how to work well in a group. So I think it's got to be in there like that, like as a thing in its own right,
So
not as.
would you have it as a
Oh yeah,
standalone
oh I would.
subject?
Well, I would have it as part of
Of
English.
course you
I
would.
don't. I don't think it should be separate from English.
Yeah.
Just as literacy isn't separate from
Yes,
English,
but
but I think it should be in there,
mhm,
and I think it should be focused on as a set of achievable skills. And again, people think, oh, people say, "Oh, well, I'm just a naturally shy person. I couldn't really speak in public." I know lots of really shy people who are brilliant actors or speakers in public. It's not to do with personality. It's to do with having the skills to be able to
Mm,
use spoken language to get things done. And I think that's what students need to learn. And in answer to what you were saying before, I think it has to start really early. I mean, we know that teachers can teach children as young as 5 or 6 to work really well in groups. So
mm,
I've been in classrooms in South London, uh, and where the students have already been taught how to work in groups. And there's just a little buzz of kind of work going on. A teacher can come and talk to me because they're all getting on with their science project. You go in a school where that's not been done, and it's a lot more chaotic,
mm,
and people aren't so kind of cooperative because they haven't been taught how.
mm,
And I think it's just something that should be expressly taught. I wish I'd been expressly
mm.
taught it, having instead of having to just pick it up.
Yeah.
You know.
And that's what you were saying. Sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I think there are lots of kind of tools that we can use that become progressive. So even think aloud protocol like agree, build, challenge,
Mm.
in the early years or year one, children are quite capable of expressing yes, no, and
Mm,
then they get more responsive to the person that they're speaking with. So acknowledging like maybe that's a good point, or
mm,
I agree with you because, and that's where the reasoning
yeah.
comes in. So I think it's quite clear that we can provide children A with these tools and B that we can do it in a progressive way that
Yeah.
improves their speaking and listening as they progress through the primary phase.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we do that in reading and writing, don't we? I
Yeah.
remember teaching my year sixes that they needed
Yeah.
to we used to say you need to pee when you
Yes.
write your reading responses, and that's make your point, explain it, and then give some evidence from the text. And it's that
Yeah.
same kind of thing you're saying there.
And I think it needs to be made clear what we're trying to do. I mean, there's still some misunderstandings sometimes that people think what Oracy is meant to be is sort of ironing out people's regional accents and making them all sound like they grew up in Surrey. And it's not. We don't have to do that, and we shouldn't be doing that. And it's not about stopping students, as I've heard again in some secondary regimes, stopping them using slang or Black British English in the corridors. You don't have to forget English when you learn French, and you don't have to forget to speak in Lancashire dialect when you are communicating with people who don't speak it. You just broaden your repertoire.
I completely agree, and I think it takes me on to a question that I've like been itching to ask you, which is about how can we make sure that oracy is still a democratizing force and it's not the imposition of another barrier or another way to reinforce privilege. So I guess I'm thinking particularly of those children who have a stammer or disfluent speech, or possibly neurodiverse children who might communicate in different ways or not be comfortable with eye contact. Um, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, I mean, obviously, there's been a recognition that a lot more children have language difficulties than used to be appreciated. And I think that's a shame. I mean, certainly, I mean, 2 members of our team are speech therapists, and they know how overstretched people are.
Mm,
And there are ways that students with some specific language difficulties can be helped to overcome them. But there are other ways that it's more a case of making sure that everybody's included and everybody can have access to the same kind of communication environment. I mean, one of the things I know that's been found out is that um, you know, autistic people sometimes have trouble joining in with group discussions and things
mm,
like that, and it's not because they don't want to or they're incapable, but it's sometimes because the subtle social rules that are involved in having discussions are not so apparent to
yeah.
those people as to others.
Mm,
And I've seen it said and written by autistic people. Once that was made utterly clear and transparent to me, it was like a light had gone on. I can just do it now. But it wasn't apparent before,
yeah.
and that's what you want. If and what's more, if other people can be help to appreciate the problems that the other students or other people in society are having in communicating, they can also take account of that, and we can move to a more, like you say, a more democratic and equitable communication environment. But it means everybody understanding more about Oracy for that to happen, really.
Exactly that. And I think that's why ground rules and establishing those ground rules, not only within your classroom, but agreeing them at the kind of school culture level
Yes.
is really, really important so
Yeah.
that those rules aren't constantly changing
No.
and you're not having to constantly adapt to rules in one classroom or ground rules in another.
Yeah. Every social situation is governed by subtle rules that often aren't handed round on a bit of card or like the rules of football written down in a book. But you have to follow them if you're going to make it work. Like in this situation, one of the ground rules is that one of us doesn't speak all the time, that we try and we listen to each other and we try and build on what's been said. And there are some physical ones, like we make sure we show that we're attending by nodding and things. Now, those things, as I say, are there when students are in class and they're asked to work in a group. And I must say, this applies to adults as well. They may not be following the best ground rules. What good ground rules are, I will listen to what someone has said and I will try and build on what they've said. Another one would be, if I don't understand what somebody means, I will ask them, not just sit there. Another one is we will take turns. We won't just let somebody speak all the time. And we'll try and reach some agreement because that's what we're trying to do in this group. They may be using bad ground rules like, well, I don't like her, so I'm not going to agree with anything she says. Or I think I know best here, so I'll just talk all the time.
Yeah.
And so by bringing that out into the open, even adults I know there's some people, very clever people at my university who I don't think know how to work well in a group
Yeah.
because they've never been taught.
That kind of leads into my next question because that's about why can assessing oracy be challenging? And I wonder if actually that's one of the reasons it is currently challenging is that those explicit aims, what we're trying to achieve at different levels is maybe not that clear and can make assessing oracy more difficult. Do people know what progress looks like in oracy in the same way as they perhaps do in writing?
But I think assessing oracy is a bit more difficult because it's such slippery stuff, isn't it? I mean, you've got to record it if you want to assess it. Well, with a written essay, you can just take it home as a teacher and mark it, can't you? And the same with maths.
Yeah.
So it's a bit more difficult. And I think the other thing that makes it difficult, which is that it's context dependent. I mean, if you're assessing how good somebody is at working with others in a group, a lot depends on who the others in a group are and whether they're
And how invested they
how
are in that
invested they are.
activity.
So you might
Yeah.
not get the best performance from somebody. And the same with giving a speech. If I ask you to give a speech on, say, the solar system now, it might not come out all that well because, you haven't thought about that for a long time.
Definitely
But
would.
if you were talking about talking classrooms, yeah.
Yeah.
So, there are things like that you've got to take into account. But what we suggest, for example, with students is with teachers that we work with, is that say they've got the aims of these 3 lessons is that students will understand the solar system, the phases of the moon, where the planets are, and how the Earth moves, and all this kind of stuff. At the end of those lessons, they will want to review those with the students, and they'll want to have some sort of discussion so they can assess how well they know them. But they could also, with the students, have the aim of we're going to learn how to work well in groups on this topic in these lessons. And we'll have the ground rules up on the wall that we're all going to follow. And at the end of it, you can say, okay, we've reviewed how well you've got on with the solar system. How have you got on with your groups? And you can say, well, in our group, it was much better because people were, all listening. Well, no, it wasn't really in ours because I think 3 people still never spoke. So you can do it with them. And if they can be drawn into the sort of self-assessment of it, that's going to make a lot more sense to them as well, isn't it? And you'll be able to tell what progress there is there.
And I also think you can deliver that sort of understanding through talk. So
Yeah.
they could be designing a podcast to describe the solar system. So they're getting their points across
That's a
through
good point.
talk. And I think there's lots of opportunities in the foundation subjects to do that sort of thing. I'm thinking particularly art and music, where actually the language of those creative arts, you're using all of the time to discuss your likes, your dislikes, what you think of a piece of artwork or a piece
Yeah.
of music. There's so many rich opportunities to express yourself.
At my very first school that I worked at, the head teacher was fantastic. And she used to say to us at the start of every school year, in that first inset day you have in September, it doesn't matter if they don't learn anything from the curriculum until October half term. Your job, and I don't think that would ever happen now, but she would say your job is to make sure the learning behaviour in your classroom, all the pupils understand, are on
Mm.
board with it, have kind of bought into it, know what's expected of them. And we used to do whole weeks English lessons on how to be a good talk partner, because
Mm.
we weren't trying to cover off persuasive writing and all that.
No,
We were
you
just
were
trying
covering
to
Oracy.
we were. And I think that was really quite crucial to talk partners being a success in other subjects, in other areas of the curriculum, that we had that freedom and that time
Yeah.
to build those things.
That's so true, and it reminds me that of a activity that I like to do at the beginning of the school year, based on a video by Ron Berger called Austin's Butterfly. So there's a 6-year-old, and he draws a picture of a butterfly from a photograph. And the children, his peers, are asked to give him kind, specific, and helpful feedback. And they're given, some instructions about what that means and what that could look like. So they're telling him, oh, this is good, but you could round the wings off here, or the body needs to be slimmer, or the wings need to be more symmetrical. And so he produces another iteration of his artwork, and then there's another round of feedback, and another iteration, and another round of feedback. And then by the end, the progress that this child has made, this 6-year-old child, this butterfly looks absolutely phenomenal. So, how are you really actively engaging with somebody else's work and giving them
Yeah.
feedback through talk? So, that was a child making incredible progress that wouldn't have happened without those oracy skills.
No, that's right.
And I just like you say that taking those moments, like either at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the term, to embed those habits and expectations, I think is really powerful.
Yeah. And I think that way of that idea of giving feedback in a kindly and constructive way, I've seen that used, for example, in School 21,
Mm,
which was one of the first schools that ever introduced Oracy in a systematic sort of in its own right way. And I remember going in and seeing what they'd done with year sevens there. They got them in groups of about 6 or so. And what they were trying to develop their presentational talk skills. And so what they did was they said asked them to just at first just give a 2-minute talk on something they were interested in, and they'd go around the group, and the others were meant to give constructive feedback on what they thought of that talk.
okay.
And it worked because everybody knew they were coming in the firing line as well in a minute. So you weren't going to be that nasty because it was your turn soon. And then they would build up to doing a longer talk. And yet they would be in this safe environment of their Inspire Talk groups, as they were called, where you wouldn't feel too nervous because it wasn't like the whole world listening. And you would build up and say, well, let's try a topic that the teacher would say. And the teacher would also be able to introduce, make their own constructive feedback to the person. Like, I think you should speak a bit slower because we were all having trouble. Just things like that.
That chance to do it again and
Yeah, and
again
chance
and
to do it
respond
again
to
and
the
again.
feedback, isn't it? That we
And
sometimes don't maybe give in the
yeah,
classroom. It's a
that,
one-off.
that's right. And by the end of it, there were students there who could stand up in the school assembly and say something that they've never dreamed they could talk for 5 or more minutes.
And I
Yeah.
think it's that, isn't it? It's finding that balance, that pivot point between children when they're young don't have fear of speaking,
That's
but
right.
when they're older, they do. So we need to make sure that they have those skills, we embed those skills before they get too afraid or before they create their own barriers about speaking and listening.
So carrying on from that, schools are obviously at very different points in their Oracy journeys. If a school is starting out, what's a kind of good first step for them in terms of Oracy? And if they're already, have Oracy quite embedded in their school, how can they develop it further?
So I think an important point to get across is that you're probably doing a lot of these things anyway. Oracy is probably showing up in your classroom in lots of ways through guided discussions, through the circle time, through things that we've discussed like peer feedback, think aloud protocols. So agree, build, challenge, think, pair, share, those sorts of things. Um, and so, actually, be reassured that you've probably done a lot of the groundwork. The challenge, I think, is, as we were talking about earlier, to how to make that progressive and structured in a way that each teacher is building on the efforts of the teacher before. So the children are building their toolkit of Oracy skills, and they're taking that into their next class
Mhm.
and building and developing their skills in a progressive way.
Yeah. Would you agree, Neil?
I would agree that that's sometimes the case, though I'm not sure I entirely agree. I think I've sometimes talked to teachers or head teachers about oracy, and they say, "Oh, we're doing that already. We're doing all that,"
Mm.
and they're not. One of the things we've encouraged teachers and schools to do, and we've been doing it with schools in just currently with some London boroughs, is what we call talk audits.
Oh,
And this is either one of us goes into the classrooms and just sits around and watches what happens for a day or something, or teachers work in groups of three to sit in each other's classrooms at a time. One, two go into another one, and they will come out and say things like, well, that was a great maths lesson, but did you notice those boys at the back never really engaged at all when you asked any questions? You never addressed them. And when they were in a group together, I don't think they spoke. They just all worked on the bit of paper in front of them. Oh, really? I didn't see that. And so I think you need to get inside this rather invisible stuff called talk.
Mm.
And I think sometimes one of the most important things you can do is do some sort of talk audit and just see what the quality of talk is like in your classrooms.
What's some good CPD or training that
Yeah.
schools could do with teachers to support them in that?
Well, we offer this. We offer a whole a series of sessions, and Voice 21 do the same,
Yeah.
and some other organisations do as well. But and I think what it needs to be done is to be broken down into practical things. You can break this down into how can you do oracy well in science lessons.
mm,
Um,
Mhm.
and this, I always say, what Cambridge, when we do educational research to do with oracy or anything, we don't sit in our beautiful ivory towers thinking of clever things from experiments to tell teachers to do. What
Mhm.
we do typically is go out, find out what really good teachers are already doing somewhere,
Mm.
mm,
and work out why it's good and why it's getting good results. And that's where this stuff all comes from.
Mhm.
That's how we know. We know that good group work improves maths results because we've found teachers who are doing it and they got good maths results.
Mm.
And so we thought, well, what exactly are they doing? So I think that's why it's important that you can through CPD learn what the best teachers are already doing. It's not
Mm.
coming in from a mile outside and saying
Yeah.
change the whole thing. It's not cognitive science saying this is how the brain works. It's this is
Yeah.
a good way of teaching.
Yeah, so I think that it doesn't have to be complicated either. It can be a simple talk tool. One of my favourites is called concentric circles. So you split the children into two groups. There's one circle of children and another circle inside it, and they face a partner. And you can start by asking them to explain, maybe they're defining a piece of key vocabulary that they've just learnt that lesson, and one partner will describe it to another. Then maybe the outside circle rotates and they have an opportunity to practice it, to refine it, to build on it, and you can keep going. And I think that rehearsal time is really important. And I think because we have such an overloaded curriculum, it's really easy to kind of squeeze out that rehearsal time, but
Mm.
it's really important for our children. They're apprentices, they're novices, to gain those skills, they really do need that practice time so that by year 4, they might be able to use the same tool, but now they're applying it to a more complex process, something like describing the water cycle.
Mm.
And so the progression is built in there with the complexity of the information that they're relaying, but actually the talk tool is really quite simple.
In kind of one line, what's the key to that's a big question, to supporting pupils with oracy?
I think the key is to be aware of how spoken language is being used in your classroom already, and whether you're doing everything that will really help the students use it more effectively themselves, and to understand more how it is used,
Mhm.
by making them more aware of how it works themselves, and by being more aware as a teacher of how you're organizing, managing, using spoken language, and seeing inside this rather invisible
Mm.
stuff.
I think the key for Oracy is understanding that it's making thinking visible.
Mm,
Um, and if anyone was in any doubt of how important Oracy is, I think looking at the counterfactual for historic events, things like Apollo 13, um, really kind of hammer that home. So you've got an exploded oxygen tank, 3 astronauts in a spacecraft, limited power, and you've got people scrambling back in NASA trying to solve problems. Now, yes, they've got tools, yes, they've got technology, but even with those things, without oracy skills, without the ability to clarify, to challenge, to ask questions, to interthink, I think is the term that Neil
yeah.
very helpfully coined in his book. So that thinking through dialogue with other people, the result could have been very different. You know, they
Mm,
wouldn't necessarily have brought those astronauts home safely. And I think it's examples like that that really highlight, yes, obviously it's about everyday stuff, but it's also about big stuff too.
Mm.
mm.
I think for me, it's just that making the implicit
Yeah,
explicit. So I
exactly.
think that's the main thing
Mm,
I've kind of got from this discussion is that we
mm,
need to make sure all teachers are aware
mm,
of those ground rules that we have around talk, and all pupils are aware of them as
mm.
well. So over to our listeners then, I guess, how we'd be interested to find out how they teach oracy in their classroom, what works best for their pupils. So um if you're listening, then please do share in comments on socials at Kapow Primary, and we'd love to hear what you think. So thank you very much for joining us.